The audiobook to Breaking from Your Parents, written by Daniel Mackler. Produced and read by Julian Glazer. Consider buying the book on Amazon. Breaking from your parents, setting a new precedent for your life and our species. Written by Daniel Mackler. Introduction. When I began my journey into breaking from my parents, I had no good resources and no true allies. I had a few fictional books for partial inspiration, such as My Side of the Mountain and Siddhartha, but I knew of no actual person who had done anything resembling what I was attempting, and I had no one to encourage, much less guide, my path. Although I did see people who rebelled against their parents through the lenses of drugs, clothing, sex, religion, and music, I somehow couldn't connect with their rebellion, which too often struck me as unconscious, self-destructive, and, below the radical surface trappings, essentially conventional. I also saw ways in which my own parents had rebelled against their parents, but their rebellion seemed flawed to me because their parents still exerted profound control over their lives. It took me a while to get my journey going. I was pretty lost at first. Almost everything I knew about what I was supposed to do with my life came from the mandates of my family and society. Love your parents, forgive their errors, accept their flaws, honor their wishes, bury your rage, deny the lies they have told you since the dawning of your memory, find a partner, have children, and then teach them to do the same. I tried to live this way, but was not very good at it. I was too real, and I was also too hurt. I had no choice but to move forward, to heal, and find something better. In the last 20 or so years, I have taken great strides in breaking from my parents and, more fundamentally, breaking from their lives. This has been a rigorous and ongoing process and has not happened all at once. My path has taken many twists and turns and has been full of errors, successes, and experiments. There have been times in which I have not spoken with them for years, and other times when I spoke with them fairly regularly. I am now 41 years old, and haven't spoken with or seen them in 4 years, and have no plans to do so. I have also, for years, been fairly open about my process of breaking away, in order to optimize my learning. I have shared my experiences and my developing point of view with countless friends, relatives, therapists, parents, curious people, email correspondents, and at times even my own parents themselves, and have collected a wealth of replies, disagreements, criticisms, personal stories, and, more recently, even support. I was also a therapist myself for more than 10 of the last 20 years, which offered me a most intimate window into others' lives, others' childhoods, and others' relationships with their parents. All this information combined with my own experience creates the base of data for this book. My goal in these pages is to provide you a voice of support on your shoulder and perhaps, if I have written it well, some new perspective. This, I hope, will augment the truth already within you. I have also tried to do here what I wished someone had done with me at certain points in my life, when I was more embroiled in the process of breaking up with my parents. Be direct. That said, I don't want to tell anyone what to do, because I didn't want anyone telling me what to do and still don't. But in my writing, I do come to real conclusions based on my experiences and assessments. And I don't tiptoe around these conclusions for the sake of politeness or societal acceptance. I'd rather avoid wasting time and speak clearly. For that reason, I have not written this book for people who are committed to staying close to their parents. Had I written it for that audience, I would have made the book 10 times longer and provided endless defenses and proofs for points that are, to this book's proper audience, more self-evident. And I would have likely convinced this improper audience of little anyway, because people's emotionally rooted reasons for staying with their parents tend to be impervious to intellectual logic. Thus, this book does not try to prove that you were damaged by your parents. It assumes it. Why else, after all, would you consider breaking from them and trying something new? Nor does this book try to prove that your parents' messages were, at the least, partially laden with their own denial or lies. It assumes that too. Nor does this book try to defend your parents' feelings and perspective for the sake of fairness or balance or compassion for them. It sides squarely with you. That is, you who defend the child you once were, and the hurt child, that part of you still remains. Hasn't their point of view been prioritized enough? But this book does provide arguments that many could find controversial. For instance, I believe that the world would be better off if we all took more steps to break from our parents. As someone who holds individual growth, emotional health, attainment of self-knowledge and usefulness to others to the highest purposes in life, I see no other way. Staying close to our parents, even if our parents are relatively healthy compared to the norm, keeps us stuck in the family perspective, beholden to the hurts they inflicted upon us and bound to pass them on to others. Yet, at the same time, I respect that the decision to break away from one's parents, or not to, is entirely a personal one. Again, I see it as no one's business, mine included, to tell anyone what to do with his or her life, or when to do it. But if you do wish to break away, I support you fully. I think the world desperately needs more people who break away from their parents and try something new. Yet, this is more than just a book of support. This book is also an exploration. It explores people leaving the cult of the family system. It explores people breaking primarily held taboos that stunt our growth. It explores people breaking family secrets and thus committing family-defined crimes. It explores the courage of people facing their deepest childhood terrors against seemingly overwhelming odds. It explores people facing rejection not only from the figures who created their existence, but also their siblings, their extended families, their social networks, their friends, their teachers, and their very societal mores. It explores family warfare, with battle lines drawn in the sand on people. And it explores the harsh consequences of this war, slander, spies, betrayal, and emotional torture. But this book also explores rebirth. It is an exploration of people finding a new life, new friends, new family, new love, new perspective, and newfound respect for their self and hope. It is an exploration of sacrifice for a purpose, trust in something deeper, and a connection with the indomitable self within. It is an exploration of the process of delving into the guts of our inner beauty, and believing in this beauty more than we believe the lies branded into us when we were young and vulnerable. It is an exploration of our right to question some of our most firmly held beliefs, and to continue to question under pressure of rejections that would have killed us when we were younger and more dependent. It is an exploration of our path toward growing stronger, standing up firmly and acknowledging our strength. It is an exploration of a new way of interacting, a new code of ethics, and a new inspiration. And it is also an exploration of a newly awakened breed of truth-tellers, a new template for social revolution, and a new society to be. A few words about me. My family deeply loved me in some ways and deeply wounded me in others. Although they provided me a certain base of nurturance and support, and were, from what I have observed, much better than most parents in the world, I suffered painfully under the tyranny of their own unresolved childhood wounds. Although they always said that I could become whatever I wanted in my life, that didn't mean that I was allowed to be whomever I wanted. They could not tolerate me being a whole, integrated self, and made it clear to me from an early age which parts of my psyche were not allowed to exist. They forced whole parts of me into hiding, and forced many of my natural reactions of pain and anger and resentment into hiding as well. My father was a gifted, respected lawyer in my hometown. He defended criminals of all stripes, and he explained to me the value of a legal system of lawyers, judges, juries, and reasonable, logical laws based on humanity and fairness. He also sometimes said kind things to me and played with me, welcomed me along on all family vacations, and paid for 4 years of my college, which wasn't cheap. I credit him for that. His positive attributes helped me grow. Yet, at the same time, he criminalized whole parts of my healthy self, prosecuting and judging me to the fullest extent of the unspoken laws of his childhood wounds. At times he screamed at me, belittled me, teased me, ignored me, and bullied me. And a few times he hit me. But as a child, I did not dwell on this, to the point that I, like a good trauma victim, blocked it out. Instead, I felt proud of him, because my survival depended on it. He was tall, he was good-looking, he made good money. He was intellectual, he was athletic, he was articulate, and he was my dad. He was the second of 2 children, born to second-generation Jewish immigrants, who didn't want him and didn't particularly love him. His mother told one of my father's aunts that he was a mistaken pregnancy, whom she would have aborted had it been legal in New York City in 1942. As such, underneath his facade of sophistication and maturity, he lacked confidence that he was worthy of love. Hardly a day went by in my childhood where he did not pester my mother to tell him that he was lovable, handsome, intelligent, and successful. Deep down, he saw himself as the unwanted child who got in the way. And sadly, that was how he often treated me, such that I internalized this attitude and thought there really was something wrong with me. My mother was her own combination of success and mess. She was a high-functioning, educated, erudite nurse of upper-middle class, white Anglo-Saxon stock. In addition to her nursing degree, she had a master's degree in geology and raised me to love the natural world. She taught me to collect and identify fossils and minerals, to catch and pin out butterflies and moths, to do taxidermy, and to raise a dozen species of pets. To many of my friends, she was the ultimate mother, far beyond normal. And while in a sense she was, and I credit her with a lot of my foundation for success in life, behind closed doors, she was a woman who had been emotionally warped by her parents, which she expressed, among other ways, through drug use and binge drinking, both of which she hid and denied. Also, she had porous and sometimes invasive sexual boundaries with me, which set me on a confused sexual path. I have long since realized her behavior toward me was perverted. My mother remained painfully close to her parents and lived for their approval. Both were high-functioning alcoholics. Her father was a respected psychology professor at Cornell University with a PhD from Harvard, a psychotherapy practice, and a penchant for sexually seducing women over whom he had power. From time to time I was born, he carried on a long-standing romantic affair with one of his former therapy patients. Right out in the open, in front of his weak, elusive wife, his emotionally crippled children, and his mostly clueless grandchildren. I, however, knew all about this from childhood onward, because my mother described it to me in detail, though she did nothing to shield me from it and nothing to confront her parents about its insanity. Few dared challenge my mother's father on anything, much less this ill and sacred cow because he made it clear that the price for cause slaughtering was banishment from his life and excision from his will. Both my parents taught me to admire and respect him and strive to win his love. He was the family patriarch. His word was God's word, and when he spoke, everyone listened. Incidentally, he was an ordained minister as well, despite being an avowed atheist. I learned to live with this kind of hypocrisy in my childhood in order to survive. When I was 23 and my grandfather 83, I confronted him about his romantic affair. He taught me quickly that all my years of investing in bonding with him meant nothing, because he rejected me outright. But by that time, I was already well on my way to independence, so his rejection and the fact that no one in the family came to my defense didn't kill me to the degree it would have likely killed my mother. And although a few in my family cheered me on silently from the sidelines, not one dared admit this support publicly. It was then that I realized that my actions, from my family's perspective, had begun defining me as a pariah. And because I didn't crumble, and because the whole experience actually left me with a more conscious and self-reflective relationship with myself, it also started dawning on me that I was stronger than all of them. Meanwhile, I also have siblings, both biological and step, as my parents are divorced from each other and have since remarried. In preparing this book, I have thought long and hard about how much to say about my siblings, and ultimately I have decided to say very little. What little I have written about them, I have done in disguised fashion. Although none of my siblings has ever come to my defense during my process of breaking from my parents, let alone joined me, I still do not feel comfortable sharing about them publicly. Although I have had my share of conflict with some of them over the years, none of them were my primary traumatizers. At best, they were like peers to me, traumatized by the same people who traumatized me. And if they hurt me, and at points they did, and I did them, it was not in the same league of intensity as those who created us. And I still share a lot of wonderful memories with some of them. In fact, some of them I still love. As regards my parents, I have decided more often than not to write about them directly, without disguise, both because I often had no better set of illustrations for the points I was making in the pages, and I also wanted to be as transparent as possible, so the reader could better know me. In many ways, this has been terrifying. As a child, I lived in terror of them destroying me through emotional abandonment if I indulged in my secret desire for honesty. This carried over into my adulthood, and although some of this terror still lingers in me, I am stronger now because I have less need for my parents' love and approval. As a child, I lived for them to rescue me, and as I grew, I projected this hope for rescue onto others. Now, through hard inner work, I find that my desire for parental rescue has shrunk, because I have instead become, more than ever, my own wounded child's parent. That is, an independent, self-loving adult. And as each month passes, I emotionally adopt myself more fully, and mostly I treat myself pretty well. Yet, I want to be clear that I do not write about my parents as means to seek the flip side of rescue, revenge. Some years back, I had an acquaintance who held a theory that getting revenge on one's family of origin is the best way to heal. I did not agree then, and I do not agree now. That's not to say that I've never felt any desire for revenge against my parents. I have. I just don't hold revenge-seeking as a good philosophy for growth. Although I am all for feeling and processing my healthy anger at those who caused me harm, and address this throughout the coming pages, my experience has shown me that seeking revenge on others only hands them my power, keeps me wedded to them, and impales me on the books of bitterness and resentment. Where is the freedom in that? I did not, however, write about the clients I worked with in therapy. That did not feel right to me. And for the people I did write about, I changed their identifying characteristics, contexts, and situations for the sake of anonymity, and where possible, asked their permission. Also, sometimes the people I have presented are amalgamations of a variety of people, myself included. But despite the disguises and adjustments, I have tried to remain true to the deeper, universal emotional dynamics of their stories. Section 1. Background. Chapter 1. Why the world resists you. Your desire to break from your parents and their lies is healthy and legitimate. The problem is, the far majority of the world doesn't see it that way. Just as they side with their own parents against themselves and with themselves against their own children. They consider your desire for truth and freedom an uncomfortable thing, perhaps even a sort of moral crime. At the level of their feelings, they say, "You have no right to break from your parents." But what they are really saying is this: your parents owned you. They owned the essence of your being and the right to define your perceptions of reality. They created you, and this makes you theirs until the day they die. By breaking from them, you are stealing their property, and stealing is wrong. To me, this sounds like slavery. In the history of America, my homeland, slaves were considered the legal property of their masters. If they escaped, they were legally considered thieves for stealing their master's property. Yet nowadays, almost everyone, at least in Western society, considers slavery unethical. The very idea of one human legally owning another disturbs us to the point that we have trouble understanding how a land like America, with liberty and justice for all, so few years ago, not only allowed it, but based its existence on it. Almost no one blames a slave for fleeing the southern plantation on risk of death and traveling to the north. We understand correctly that human relationships are voluntary, and that it is wrong for one human to own another and profit from his or her involuntary labor. Even 2 centuries ago, many in the United States understood this and aided escaping slaves through the Underground Railroad. They realized that the real criminals were the owners, not the owned. But where, 2 centuries later, is such a movement for those defending rights of people who want to break from their parents? Where are the safe houses for people like you and me, the newspapers telling our stories, the inflamed rhetoric, the scores of published books, the people willing to break the laws of the land and risk their lives for us and our cause? Instead, what we have today is a world that largely blames the victims, obfuscates the issues, defends the perpetrators, and looks suspiciously on the agitators, as if there were something inherently wrong with those who promote breaking from the lies of the family, defending the rights of the child, and changing society for the better. At best, we have a few people speaking out against the furthest extremes of bad parenting, such as rape of children, female and male genital mutilation, abject neglect, and harsh corporal punishment. But what of the milder forms of abuse that most consider healthy and normal, or at worst insignificant? Who speaks out against how badly children are affected by conventional religion and education and television? Who speaks out against the negative effects of single parenthood? Who speaks out against the societal glorification of families with multiple children because they cannot manage their own internal states? And who speaks out against the whole corrupt institution of regular, that is, largely unconscious, people having children? The movement I espouse, the movement that places the rights of the child, be he full grown or not, higher than the rights of the parent, is in its infancy. The average person who comfortably sees the evils of slavery would reflexively side with your parents if you broke from them. So many times have I told someone that I have broken from my parents only to have that person ask for no details whatsoever and instead emotionally side with my parents and start arguing with me about why I'm making a mistake and unfairly harming them. This is an issue on which so many people simply lack self-reflection. To present another metaphor, I have observed that few people, in the Western world at least, blame a physically abused wife for leaving her sadistic husband. When she stands up for herself, the best of the progressive world encourages and applauds her and sees the logic in trying to give her and her children a safe place to live while she gets back on her feet. Perhaps they will offer her financial resources and legal representation, orders of protection, even a new legal identity. And they provide her endless examples on television and even pop music of other women who have walked the courageous path she's undertaking. The modern world understands that her participation in her marriage is voluntary, and if her husband mistreats her, she has a right and even responsibility to leave. Yet, why doesn't the world understand that these same principles apply to people who want to break free from their families of origin? The answer is sad and simple. The modern world resists supporting people who emotionally or literally break from their parents because almost no one has yet done it to any significant degree. People find it almost impossible to support that which they have not yet done and unconsciously are desperate to do, but terrified to admit. The idea is too futuristic and renders them blind with fear. The reality is that the world is in a near absolute denial of the horror that average parents commit on their children. People have lost their natural-born ability to empathize with children because it was traumatized out of them. They long since lost their connection with the little self they once were and unconsciously still remain. They can literally forget that they were raped, tortured, beaten, and neglected. And also, on the milder side of things, can block out their early years of pain, sorrow, rejection, loneliness, and hurt. They simply do not remember. This is normal. Fully empathizing with life's victims unconsciously terrifies them because it requires that they face their own inner torment. So instead, they displace their empathy onto those who did the traumatizing. They are the hostage who sees the good heart in the kidnapper, the worker who falls in love with the cruel boss, and the dog who licks the hand that starves it. And they are the normal children, who cannot call either their abusive parents by their average or extreme, by their real names, and instead forever repeat the adage, they did the best they could. What Jew in Auschwitz would say that Hitler did the best he could? This analogy might seem far-fetched, but it isn't for those who know the detailed histories of their own childhood pain at the hands and partially frozen hearts of their parents. And it is even less of a far-fetched analogy when one realizes that Hitler and the Germans were themselves only reenacting their own childhood histories of abuse by fomenting the Holocaust. Alice Miller describes this dynamic brilliantly in For Your Own Good. The reason no Jews in Auschwitz defended Hitler is they had no reason to. Jews from Auschwitz could clearly see Hitler as their enemy, and any halfway awakened person obviously took their side. Hitler never pretended to be a father figure for the Jews, and only stated clearly that he wanted them all dead. And the Jews also had each other, a whole culture for support and mirroring and witnessing. What culture does a child have for support? The leaders of his culture are his parents. But while parents might, on an emotional level, have some of the same motives as Hitler, their cruel methods and actions are far more private and are infused and thereby disguised with threats of real love and caring. Parents tend to act like benevolent kidnappers who induce Stockholm Syndrome in the hostage. Parents only rarely kill their child in body. Instead, they indoctrinate him into their cult, first by proving themselves absolutely necessary for his survival, which is easy to do with a child, and then by brainwashing him into believing them to be fully on his side. If parents do this job thoroughly, the child buries his pain and rage and suffering and sorrow and grows up to become a clone of them, doing unto his children as was done unto him. And if he does so, he becomes a darling of society and is labeled a good parent. And who will criticize him? He's normal. And you can bet that unless he heals his own wounds and reconnects with his real self, he will be unable to give you much support in breaking deeply from your parents. How could he? Chapter 2. Breaking away is hell. If breaking from our parents were as simple as cutting them off, blocking their phone calls, changing our email addresses, and jumping into a new, better life, a lot more people would do it. Although this pleasant scenario does seem to work for some people, at least on the surface. Life for many is not so simple because the work of breaking away can be emotionally arduous and the consequences painful. A key reason is that our personalities formed intertwined with our parents, which allowed their troubled sides to embed themselves deeply and firmly in our psyches. Although in psychological terms, these embedded parts are known as negative parental introjects, or in shorthand, introjects, I prefer to liken them to warts. A wart is a parasitic virus that embeds itself deeply in your flesh. Your body builds a protective layer and hardened skin around the wart, so much so that the wart can actually seem to be a malformed part of you. But warts are not you. They are your enemy. They drink from your blood supply. They kowtow to a foreign master, and they resist like hell coming out. The only difference between warts and introjects is that it's a lot harder to get rid of an introject. You can freeze off a wart. You can't freeze off an introject. Also, some people are so embedded with introjects that they never get a good chance to develop a strong, viable, authentic self at all. Metaphorically speaking, they are more wart than person, yet they don't even know it, because they don't know the difference between wart and self. Their introjects have almost total control over their thoughts, their self-perceptions, and their actions. As we begin to break free from our parents, our introjects come to life. As if commanded by remote control, they turn against our vulnerable, authentic selves with ugly voices, self-doubt, and pro-parent thoughts. Some people's introjects pressure them with guilt as follows. "You are selfish," they might say, "and hurtful to break away. Your parents love you and gave life to you and devoted the best of their energies to you, and you know that. If it hadn't been for them, you wouldn't even be here to think these thoughts. What right do you have to turn your back on them? You really are a cruel individual. You hurt them, and that's not okay. You should be ashamed of yourself. You deserve whatever punishment they throw at you. Go back to them. You owe them that, and you owe yourself that." Others introjects try terror tactics. "You cannot make it on your own. You need them. No one really loves you except your parents. No one out in the world even likes you. You will never be close with anyone apart from them. You will die of loneliness without them. You're committing emotional suicide. You are insane for leaving them. Anyone who tells you otherwise is an enemy. Go back to them. Apologize to them. Return to them, fool." Not surprisingly, our parents can easily trigger our introjected voices, because our introjected voices are actually the words of them. They are not us. This triggering can be as simple for them as a phone call, an email, a subtle guilt trip, a cool tone, or a cutting remark. This calls to mind a beautiful old saying about interjects. Of course, your parents can press your buttons. They install them. The problem is, in a civilization such as ours, which is largely a massive conglomeration of overlapping family cults upholding the same troubled values, the whole world can press our interjected buttons and send us careening back to our parents. I've met so many people who have broken from their parents on the surface yet, when under pressure, run back to them because they never figured out how to get rid of their interjects. In the past, I have done it myself, and I still occasionally find myself pressured to do it, especially if I'm in an emotional toxic environment. As an example, while writing the first draft of this book, I received an email from a middle-aged mother who read my website. "I hope," she wrote, "you can find it in your heart to forgive your mother. And I write this not for her sake, but for yours. Living with the bitterness and anger that you so visibly express is not healthy. I really hope you consider what I'm saying, because you seem like such a genuine and courageous person who could really be very useful to the world." As another example, some years back, when I worked at a therapy clinic where most of the therapists were parents, I got into a discussion with a colleague, David, who was planning to circumcise his newborn son, his firstborn child, in a Jewish ritual. I tried to convince him not to and took the risk of letting him know that I considered circumcision to be very harmful to infants. He was offended by this and turned my defense of his child back onto me, accusing me of having an infantile axe to grind with parents. But it didn't end there. I was later approached by 2 senior therapists who sided with him. "Daniel," said one, a mother of 3, "he's a new father. It's not respectful to make him feel insecure. Just because you are putting your parents through the spin cycle doesn't mean you have a right to drive a wedge between David and his son." "It's hard enough as it is to be a new parent," said the other therapist, a father of 2, "without everyone giving you their holy opinion on what you are doing wrong. Someday you may have kids, and then you will realize it. In the meantime, I think you might benefit from returning to analysis. You are universalizing your unresolved material." I tried to point out that David letting his son get circumcised and not my criticizing it would drive a wedge between them, but this only made them angry. "You are too judgmental," said the mother. "Therapists need to be compassionate." "I'm just trying to side with the child," I said. "And I side with the child inside my clients." "You missed the point," said the father. "You're just too afraid to forgive." This caused me anxiety. Not only did it kick up the ancient messages embedded in me by my parents that there was something wrong or defective with me, but it made me feel frightened that I could destroy my career by being so vocal. And my career has been a key ally for me in my path to independence from my family of origin. So I backed off, stopped arguing, and let them feel that they had won. But I admit, I hated that. It is standard operating procedure for normal people to pathologize you if you break from your parents and side with the child. Yet I have become convinced that all people, even the most abusive and conventional, secretly want to side with their own wounded child within. The wounded inner child is not only the person they love the most in the world, but also the person they are most terrified to defend, because they learned long ago that when they defended their true inner selves, they got rejected in the most painful ways by their parents. Thus, when you side with the child, any true child, you subliminally declare freedom, revolution even, for all wounded inner children. You speak to everyone's heart, including the heart of abusers, which creates terror, because it goes against our unconscious training. That is why abusers and people who side with abusers resist you. If they didn't resist you, then they would have to face the emotional consequences of agreeing with you, which would blow the circuits of their stability. Your insight threatens people's lack of insight. As those therapists did with me, they will mistake your insight for an attack and then actually attack you in order to defend their denial. And the more maturely you develop your logical replies to the insanity they lob at you, the louder and crueler their attacks will be. Perhaps they will call you a crazy or out-of-control person, or a liar, or someone with a creative memory. Perhaps they will accuse you of being someone who makes a mountain out of a molehill, a negative person who only remembers the bad things, or a sick idealist. Or perhaps they will label you a malingerer, a slanderer, or a libelist. I have been labeled all these things, and had I argued further with those therapists, they probably would have gotten me fired. After all, I could totally imagine them arguing, "How can we, in good conscience, allow such a troubled, opinionated, dogmatic, unanalyzed person to be a therapist here? He could really hurt people." Or perhaps, if your context is a little different, they will call you mentally ill, finding mental health professionals to back them up and brand you delusional, paranoid, borderline, schizophrenic, manic, depressed, psychotic, or hysterical. Perhaps they will have you locked up in psychiatric wards, strapped down in your 4-point restraints and force-injected with antipsychotics. Perhaps they will find ways to get the media on their side. Perhaps they will say you've been dragged into a cult. Or perhaps they will call the police on you and have you arrested and taken to jail. I know people who have experienced all these things for telling the truth. And perhaps your own body will express your parentally induced psychological torment. I have seen some people whose physical bodies have manifested their inner conflicts in all sorts of ways. I have experienced this myself for the last decade, and so will use myself as an example. My physical problems have arisen from a combination of screaming desperation to break fully free from my parents and the simultaneous internalized terror of getting away. My first sign of this conflict came with overpowering migraine or migraine-like headaches that exploded in the middle of the night while I was sleeping. Their pain was so horrendous I would run to the bathroom to vomit. I tried journaling to help myself get at the root of my feelings, and twice while journaling I unraveled the emotional knot of the headache and wept in grief and empathy for myself, evaporating the headache immediately. Most other times I couldn't access the nugget and instead suffered for hours or took pain pills. My headaches finally went away after about a year, but the source of emotional conflicts causing them did not, leading my body to express my buried horror in a new way. Ulcerative colitis, that is, inflammation of the large intestine. In many ways, this was even worse. For 5 years, I lived with chronic bloody diarrhea, a terror of going outside for fear of bathroom accidents, an inability to eat almost anything normal, and excruciatingly painful side effect of kidney stones, for which I had to have surgery. It was not fun. Not knowing what else to do aside from continuing to heal emotionally and refusing to heed my introjects and return to my parents, I took the pills my doctors prescribed to no avail. They said I was an irregular case. I tried to explain to them that my journaling and life experience demonstrated to me that my problem was emotionally caused and that there was good scientific evidence showing how intimately the brain, the emotions, and the gut are interconnected. but they had no clue what I was talking about and ignored me. I would have gotten more empathy from a witch doctor than a modern, scientifically trained medical doctor. Only in the last 3 years, years of profound distance from my parents, has the colitis eased, such that I no longer take any pills and have almost no symptoms. In some ways, this has been a miracle, because none of the doctors predicted it, much less predicted that it would happen while simultaneously quitting all their prescribed drugs. But I am not fully healed. Physically, the colitis has been replaced by vitiligo, disappearance of pigment on the skin of my hands and feet. I assume that this too is temporary, and I only wonder what is next. I think it will reflect my inner journey, but I cannot predict how, because frankly, very little of this has been terribly predictable to me. Meanwhile, I don't want to make myself sound insane with physical symptoms, but this has been my history. The reality, though, is that this insanity was implanted in me by my family system, and my physical symptoms are only manifestations of its eruption through various lenses of my body. And while this has been hell for me, and for others whose similar stories I have heard, it is, as odd as this might sound, a hell I personally welcome. Deep inside, I know this to be true. Slowly and progressively, it has been saving my life. Chapter 3. Parents avoid responsibility. Our society allows parents great liberty in not having to take responsibility for the disturbed things they do to their children. Although this is slowly shifting, such that parents are prosecuted more nowadays for sexual abuse and extreme violence, these crimes are just the extreme tip of the abuse iceberg. Child abuse happens when people in power do anything that harms the emotional self of the child. By this definition, 99% of the iceberg still remains hidden underwater, unacknowledged by almost anyone, and perfectly legal. And if you defend the abused child in these unacknowledged situations, society as a whole will blame you. After all, much people are in such a trance that they don't even realize that children have much of an emotional self. All they see clearly is children with bodies that can be bruised and genitals that can be violated. And they only defend, if they do any defending at all, that which they can't see clearly. Recently, I was on the subway in New York City, sitting across from a young couple and their crying 3-year-old son. The mother told the boy,
"Shut your damn mouth right now. I've heard enough crying out of you."
When he kept crying, she rolled up her eyes and said,
"Fine, you go on crying, but when we get home, you're gonna go right to bed, and that's all there is."
The child's eyes grew wide with fear, and he struggled to stifle his tears. Meanwhile, his father sat on the other side of him, uninterested, and said nothing. And no one on the train said anything either. I considered my options. My first option was to say what I was feeling, in hopes of having them take responsibility for their actions. My proposed words: stop abusing the child. First, he's crying for a reason. Obviously, he's upset. The appropriate response is to hold him and hug him, and talk gently with him. Second, you, his mother, are denying his feelings by ordering him to stop. That's abusive. You should respect his feelings. Third, you just threatened him with physical isolation for not following your orders. That is torture, which is seriously abusive. He needs physical closeness, not isolation. Fourth, you, his father, did absolutely nothing to defend him. That's neglect, which is abusive as well. He needs a father who stands up for him, otherwise he will have a very hard time learning to stand up for himself. You parents need serious help, because you yourselves are both wounded children and have no right to have an actual child under your care. The result of this option, the mother would likely have cursed me out for not minding my business, and the father might have physically threatened me, or worse, for disrespecting his child's mother. And it's doubtful anyone on the train would have defended me, and perhaps someone else would have joined the parents in confronting me. After all, my reality-based definition of abuse threatens to rock the apple cart of society's denial. Also, it's highly unlikely these parents would become less abusive toward that child as the result of my intervention. They actually probably would have punished him more for it. That is the sick privilege of parenthood. My second option was to say nothing and log the incident in my mental database. That is what I did. I stared powerlessly at the little boy, struggling to make eye contact with him in the useless hope that somehow he would know that someone out there understood what was happening and cared. I also found myself contemplating his life in 15 or 20 years. After all, his abuse won't just go away. He will replicate it somehow. In this vein, more than likely 20 years earlier, I was watching his parents, then little children themselves, get treated in the same perfectly legal way on the subway. I see this type of parental behavior all over. Before I became a psychotherapist, I played music for pre-kindergartners in a New York City public school. One season of that job was enough for me, because among other reasons, many parents blamed the teachers and the school for everything, and no one stood up to them. No matter that their kids came to school hungry from having not been properly fed, tired from having stayed up all night, inappropriately dressed because of parental neglect, and violent and hypersexualized from the things they watched on television and saw their families do. Their kid couldn't do puzzles. According to the parent, that meant the teacher was inept. Their kid couldn't get along with classmates. The school psychologist was incompetent. Their kid fought on the playground. The school lacked proper supervision. Because many of the staff, even those who gave it their all, were burned out. It amazed me how little the world required that parents take responsibility for their actions and for the consequences of their actions. As another story of parents who eschew responsibility, a Chicago therapist I know told me about her 30-year-old client, Kristen. Kristen felt bereft about a recent romantic breakup and anxious about ongoing conflict with her parents. Because of the conflict, she had not spoken with them in several months and was considering making a more permanent break. Kristen was an only child who came from a home in which her father occasionally slapped her mother, and her mother emasculated him by having extramarital affairs. Her parents had regularly dragged Kristen into their battles, each trying to win her to their respective side with enticements, and each growing cold toward her if she took the side of the other. As a result, Kristen had felt devastated, or simply miserable, for much of her childhood, which had prompted her parents to take her to a psychiatrist for antidepressants, which, incidentally, they both took. Kristen, however, had adamantly refused medication, causing them both to torment her further for rebelling and refusing the help she needed. Kristen saw the therapist for 3 sessions spread over 6 weeks, despite agreeing to meet weekly. She skipped 3 of the sessions without notice and came late to 2 of the 3 she made. She admitted that she felt ambivalent about therapy because of having been forced to see the psychiatrist as a child. Despite this, she did do some exploration in her sessions, noting the similarity between her ex-boyfriend and her parents. Like them, her ex-boyfriend had demeaned her, been volatile toward her, tried to control her, and stored up anything personal she shared with him to use against her later. The result of this story is that after the 3rd session, Kristen had a reunion with her boyfriend, had sex with him, then immediately afterward had a fight with him, at which point he left her once again. For her, that was the last straw. She climbed onto the roof of her apartment building and jumped, committing suicide. I share this story because afterward her parents sued the therapist for malpractice. Although they set Kristin up for her dysfunctional adulthood, they took no responsibility, and the jury agreed with them, awarding them with a $250,000 judgment against the therapist's malpractice insurance. The reason, based on Kristin's diagnosis of major depressive disorder, the therapist had not adequately pressured her to go to a psychiatrist for medication evaluation. That is, the therapist had not taken up Kristin's parents' call to arms to follow their path and medicate away the very feelings that they induced in her. Rather than outing Kristin's abusive parents for robbing her of her authentic self, the legal system, part of the fraternity of parents, compensated them for having been robbed of their daughter. But this analysis is taboo. After all, by conventional societal standards, and even by psychiatric standards, they didn't abuse her at all. In fact, by psychiatric standards, which arise from the mores of our pro-family, denial-based society and the money of Big Pharma, they were the bereaved. They were her best allies. They had her best interests at heart, and they loved her unconditionally. And damn the truth. I went red when I heard this story, but since my rage had nowhere to be expressed, I diverted it into a fantasy in which the devastated therapist who, in 2 hours of sitting with Kristin, saw her childhood dynamics more clearly than her parents ever had, would sue the parents. She would sue them for having destroyed their child and for having indirectly traumatized the therapist herself. And she would win. But she would not keep the money and might not even sue for money at all. Instead, she would sue to set the record straight. She would sue for same measure of justice for Kristin, as if such a thing were even possible. But with our world in such denial, this could never happen. Our world believes that, except in certain extreme cases, parents are to be protected at all costs. Our world considers parents' past abuses of their children to be of little or no significance. Our world believes that children go unaffected by the average horrors of their environment, or they consider children to be resilient. If only they were so resilient. Children only seem resilient to people who, because of their own unresolved and unacknowledged traumas, lack empathy for them. Society largely offers parents a free ticket to abuse their child as long as they don't break a few basic rules regarding extreme sexual or physical abuse. Just to make clear what I mean, I will list and flesh out 12 conventionally acceptable forms of child abuse, each of which will traumatize him or her. First, lying to a child, which sends the child this message. Your perceptions are invalid. In order for me to love you, you have to trust my dishonesty more than you value your emotional connection with truth. Second, manipulating a child through ultimatums, such as the silent treatment, which sends this message. Although you need me to love you, I don't. In fact, you are so worthless that it's okay for me to torture you. Submit or I will reject you. Your desires to dialogue, self-express, and be heard mean nothing. Third, emotionally leaning on a child which says, I won't parent you unless you parent me first. Take care of me. I created you to love me. All love is conditional, except of course yours from me, which must remain unconditional. Fourth, using double binds, that is, two simultaneous but mutually conflicting messages or commands, which says, You're damned if you do, and damned if you don't. It's lose-lose for your authenticity and win-win for my dishonesty. So, submit. Fifth, emotionally bullying or teasing a child, which says, Your existence bothers me.
Your emotions get in my way. Your boundaries mean nothing, and hurting you makes me feel good.
Sixth, subtly sexualizing a child or commenting negatively on his or her looks, which says, "Your value to me, and thus to the world, is not as a centered, real, true, respected, emotional human being, but as a sexual object for adults." Seventh, not following through on your word, which says,
"You cannot count on me, and nothing you do or feel will change that. You and your feelings are not important to me."
Eighth, demanding perfection from a child, which says, "You are not allowed to make mistakes. You are not allowed to experiment, and you are not allowed to grow." Ninth, failing to be a major role model for a child, which says,
"Although I am the most important person in your world, I have little of value to teach you. Thus, if you want to become a great person, you will have to reject me, which, of course, is impossible, because you need me too much. You are trapped."
10th, having a child put on psychiatric medication, which says, "You are inherently flawed, and only an outside substance can manage you. The problem is within you. Not only are we, your parents, not the problem, but even if we were, we will never change." 11th, using a child as a pawn in a divorce or custody battle, which says,
"You are a tool by which I can act out my immaturity, rage, and selfishness. I don't care about you or your other parent. I am not committed to you and never was. You are worthless."
12th, ripping a child out of his or her social network through moving from location to location, which says, "I don't care about the life you have built, because my life is more important. Your stability is not my priority, and your attachments don't count. Your terror of starting over is not my primary concern." And we wonder why our world is so sick. An adult child who commits suicide threatens parents much less than one who breaks away and gets real. An adult child who commits suicide dies with many or all of his family's secrets hidden, whereas one who gets real rips the truth wide open. Although Kristen, mentioned in the previous chapter, probably did trigger a significant amount of pain in her parents by killing herself, she would have triggered a lot more had she broken away from them and outed their lies by healing from the abuse they inflicted on her. And I purposefully use the word triggered, not caused, because Kristen did not cause her parents' pain. Her parents' own abusive parents caused their pain. Kristen just helped bring this historical pain to the surface, and had their parents nurtured their own healing orientation, they would have used this pain to heal. But instead, they used it to cement their denial into place, for which they were rewarded financially. The reason I return to Kristen's story is that I find the dynamics underlying her suicide to be universal. I have never met suicidal people, including chronically ill elderly people who want to commit suicide due to physical pain, for whom I could not say, once I got a chance to know their deeper story, that their suicidality was not profoundly motivated by their history of childhood abuse. In fact, people have no other, more motivating factor to kill themselves than a history of having been abused by the parents, that is, a history of having been already partially, emotionally maimed by the parents. Suicide is a logical but unconscious reenactment of the psychological homicide committed on children by their parents. But suicide is only a logical reenactment by a child who never became able to face the emotional reality of what he went through. For people who break from their parents and develop a strong relationship with their authentic selves, replicating by suicide the horror of being crushed by their parents no longer makes sense.
If we have the good fortune to break from our parents, we instead grow more loving toward ourselves each day. This becomes our new template for behavior. But if we don't break from our parents and break deeply from them, we stay trapped in the lies, and then we can never become uncrushed. In this vein, I often hear parents say that they would die for their child. Essentially never, though, I hear them say that they would get real for their child, because that doesn't cross their mind. They have no template for it. Instead, they generally say one of the following pat statements, which I will translate into reality. They say, "I would sacrifice my life for my child." My translation: if my child sacrifices his authentic self for my unconscious needs and accepts my distorted point of view about him, I will protect what's left of him. That is, if my child stops battling against my abuse and buries his authenticity, I will consider him of such a high value that I will sacrifice my life, which I don't consider to be of particularly high value, for him. They say, "I love my child unconditionally." My translation: I'm unconditionally enmeshed with my child. That is, I'm so mixed up in my sense of who I am and who my child is and what our mutual boundaries are as separate individuals that I mistake enmeshment for love. They say, "I love my child even more than I love myself." My translation: I so thoroughly don't know my real self and real motives and real feelings that I delude myself into believing that I'm totally on my child's side, even though I significantly crushed my child's real self, and I'm actually on the side of the abusive parents who crushed me. And they conclude with the following: you never really know what love is until you have a child. And here's how I translate this. I abandoned my inner child because my parents forced me to. Because of that, I have no clue what true love is, which of course suggests that I should never have had children. And the fact that you are hinting at how emotionally ignorant I am causes me, in self-soothing protection of my ignorance, to label you the ignorant one. Conditional love is the standard of modern parental love. As such, when a child does not do what his parents want him to do, or even demand that he does, they stop loving him. And often they actively hate him, and sometimes they even admit it. Examples of extreme cases of this admitted hatred come when parents disown their children for becoming gay, or for joining a different religion, or for marrying or having children with someone of a different race or ethnicity. And in some places in the world, parents simply kill their female children because they don't meet the condition of being male. But the example of children breaking from sophisticated parents interests me more because it highlights how incipient murderousness exists where we would least expect it. Here I think of my friend Tracy. She came from a professional, educated family. She received many of the good perks of a white, middle-class life, yet somehow she had the passion and wherewithal to break the trance into which her parents had put her. Her parents were masters of manipulation, double binds and the silent treatment, and by the time Tracy was in college, she started to talk openly about this with her peers. Her parents tried to silence her through various means, including telling lies about her, besmirching her good name, and labeling her mentally ill, all of which failed. She only used their cruelty to grow more real and to break further away. I recently asked her if she thought they would be happier if she killed herself. "Are you kidding?" she replied. "Of course they would. I'm destroying their fragile little world of lies and control, and they hate me for it. By getting real, I forced them to face how dishonest they are and how deficient they were as parents. They've put a ton of energy into denying it,
and it would spare them a lot of work if I just died or killed myself. So, which do you think they'd prefer? I asked. You dying or you killing yourself? Killing myself, she answered. That would demonstrate proof that I was mentally ill, which is the bill of goods they've been trying to sell everyone anyway. If I killed myself, they would start spinning to everyone how much they'd always loved me and how horrible they felt about my poor, tragic fate. But the truth is, from the minute I started getting real about how lousy they were as parents, they didn't care about me or my fate. They only cared about my well-being when I was playing their game of denial. After I quit the game, they wanted me dead. Tracy's story reminds me in some ways of my own. I have come to accept that at various points in my breaking away process, my parents would have likely been relieved if I had committed suicide. It was certainly not been easy for them to have a son who publicly labels them abusers, yet their desire for the easy path has not been my responsibility. On the contrary, it was the essence of my problem. Their desire for the easy path was what, in no small part, led them to abuse me in the first place. The more traumatized I was, the less I challenged them. And the converse holds true as well. The more real and mature and life-loving I have become, the more dangerous I become to their denial. I read books such as these, whereas dead men labeled mentally ill cannot tell the truth. As a speaker on the radical psychology circuit about recovery from psychosis without medication, I not infrequently meet parents whose so-called mentally ill children have committed suicide. Many of these parents have become activists against psychiatry and speak about the horrors psychiatry did to their children. Although psychiatry is unethical and regularly abuses people, sometimes to the extreme that the way that psychiatry treats patients is an extension of the way parents in denial treat their children. Psychiatry almost always failed to look at problems in a greater context, and instead tries to treat the consequence of the problem, and even medicalizes these consequences as symptoms which it then attacks with pills and hospitals and the like. But if parents didn't abuse their children, there would be no psychiatry at all. The two function very similarly, with their lies, their coercion, their demand for acquiescence, and, not surprisingly, their trail of harm. Although the circuit on which I speak is radical, because the mental health field is largely so blind to the obvious, the subject about which I write here is presently a quantum leap beyond radical. It is taboo. When I think back on the last 10 or so conferences I attended, I conclude that if I addressed this subject matter there, I would not be invited back. Rarely does anyone even come close to speaking about it. Instead, I hear the parents' advocates, who are sometimes invited and paid, about how much they loved their mentally troubled child, how wonderful their relationship was with that child, how they devoted their lives to that child, how that child was a great soul touched by mental distress, and how devastating the suicide was from them as parents. I almost never hear a single one of them, except in rare, private, confidential, one-on-one moments of deep anguish, even approach the topic of taking responsibility for their actions. And these moments of exception come only when the parents feel unconditionally supported by a nurturing ally who empathizes primarily with the child within them and only secondarily with the actual child who has committed the act of self-murder. Simply put, when these parents are on their own and not feeling support for their own wounded inner child, they do not empathize with their dead child's point of view and cannot even if they wanted to. They don't have the internal structure to do it. It's too much of a stretch for them, even intellectually. Instead, I hear them speak through the lens of their unconscious defenses. An important part of parents' healing process is to get over the guilt and the necessity of embarking on the process of radical forgiveness. And then I observe the bulk of the parents and the denial-laden therapists and the mental health consumers in the audience applaud the speaker's courage and maturity and devotion. But I do not applaud. And although I don't believe in heaven, I know that if there were a heaven, the speaker's child who committed suicide first and foremost because of the torture inflicted on her by her parents, from which she never figured out how to escape, would not applaud either. Instead, she would scream down the following from her cloud above. "Go to hell, Mom, you hypocrite. Your parents destroyed you, then you probably more than half unknowingly destroyed me, and now you are milking gold out of me by making yourself out to be my savior. I know you are suffering from all that has happened, but how about start by taking responsibility for your own life and your own actions instead? You screwed up, and my screw up was that I failed to figure out how to break away from you. Oh, and from that too, because he's half responsible for the damages of my childhood." Chapter 5. Do your parents owe you? If you are a child, your parents owe you a lot. They owe you your nurturance, time, respect, guidance, consistency, loyalty, stability, healthy community, money, food, shelter, and the model of a healthy relationship between them as mother and father, partner and partner. They owe you their conscious presence without the influence of drugs or alcohol or psychiatric medication. They owe you the ability to sense your age-appropriate needs and to be able to meet them. They owe you the most mature, emotionally available, insightful, loving parents you can possibly have. When they had sex to create you, they made a contract with the new life that was you. The small print on the contract stipulated that in every area of parenting, they committed to doing a great job. And if they failed in any area, they failed to live up to the contract. This, however, highlights the contract's unfair parts. First, that there is no way for you to collect for the damages they inflicted on you. And second, that if you are an adult, they no longer owe you anything. If they failed you, and more so, where they failed you, it is now your responsibility to clean up the mess. In short, even though they broke it, it's your job to fix it. The question is, when does your adulthood begin? If we speak of physiological adulthood, which is marked by the passing through puberty and the ability to procreate, then some as young as 8 or 9 are technically adults. If we speak about emotional adulthood, most people remain partial children their whole lives, until death. However, for the purposes of this book, I define the age of adulthood as beginning roughly in your early 20s. This is the time in which you gain the social, occupational, and psychological capacity to become your own functional, independent person, and in essence, to receive the responsibility for becoming your own parent. The job of raising the remaining childish and adolescent parts of yourself now becomes yours and no one else's. It becomes your job to heal your wounds and learn to live maturely. The reason I address this subject is because many people in their 20s or 30s or 40s or beyond hear parts of my point of view, misconstrue my meaning, and misapply it to their lives. They think that because I am so harsh on parents and because I so strongly side with the child that I feel their parents still owe them something. This could not be further from the truth. Consider the example of Paul, a 35-year-old man who recently sent me a long email detailing his story. He'd read some of my website and felt he'd found an ally in me. Paul slept in his parents' furnished basement, didn't work, lived off an allowance they gave him, and spent most of the day smoking marijuana, playing video games, and surfing the web. I grant this is a rather extreme case, but so be it. He was rightly furious at his parents for having destroyed his childhood. As I trusted his description of what they did to him decades earlier, yet he felt they owed him compensation. He wanted advice on how to go about getting it. He was offended when I replied gently that although I trusted that they certainly had set him up for a life of misery, they no longer owed him anything. Now it was his responsibility to quit smoking weed, get a job, stop taking their money, move out, and start taking his life seriously. The same applies to me. Parenting myself is my job. It is no longer my parents' job or anyone else's job. It's not my friend's job, and if I have a girlfriend, it's not her job. And if I have children, it's certainly not their job. Once we become chronological adults, we can't look outside ourselves to find others, even therapists, to tend to our unresolved childhood needs. If we do, we, like Paul, secretly stay children and don't evolve optimally. That's not to say that I, in my adulthood, haven't had my share of emotionally charged fantasies about my parents or other parental surrogates rescuing me, because I have and still have that capacity, but that doesn't make them appropriate fantasies. Meanwhile, on the other hand, not infrequently, I get emailed or called by parents themselves wondering what they owe their angry, grown-up, demanding, and often seemingly helpless children. They see me as one who speaks in a language similar to that of their children, but with the twist of a professional perspective. The general feedback I provide is that they should do what they can to help the adult child transition to proper adulthood. That generally includes finding ways of gradually and respectfully withdrawing the support, be it material or emotional or both, to which they have made their child addicted. This often requires delicateness, if it is to be done with respect. Sometimes they may have to increase their support in one area while they decrease it in another. For instance, I know some parents who have withdrawn their emotional support while temporarily boosting the financial, and others who have withdrawn the financial while temporarily boosting the emotional. Rarely is this either simple or easy. In many cases, the inappropriate support they provide has actually been a form of metaphorical compensation for that which they failed to provide emotionally when he was young. Now, this support is misplaced, age inappropriate, and damaging because it sends their child the age-old message that he is incompetent to figure out life himself. And the longer they send him that message, the more likely he will be not just to believe he is incompetent, but actually to become incompetent. All too often, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other cases, they unconsciously provide him support with the intent of keeping him addicted to them for life, because they themselves are terrified of being alone. And in other cases, they are inappropriately giving him that which they themselves fantasize getting from their own parents but never got. And sometimes they are doing a simultaneous combination of all of these. Yet the bottom line advice, or perhaps guidance, I give to parents, which scant few can take, is that their responsibility is to grow. It is their responsibility to study themselves, to be rigorously honest with themselves about their own motives, to heal their own inner wounds of childhood, and to learn proper boundaries. Part of this involves breaking from their own parents, whether or not their parents are already dead. And then, though usually I never get this far with parents because this gets too advanced, it becomes vital that parents take responsibility for the inappropriate things they did to their children, first by acknowledging to themselves what ancient wounds within them caused them to make the errors they made and by resolving the wounds. This is quite a task. If my own parents had followed this advice, or at least seriously attempted it and continued to work at it, I'd probably be closer with them now. After all, instead of being impediments to my inner journey, they would have come much closer to being allies. But at the same time, I'm not sure how close I ever would be with my parents, even if they devoted themselves optimally to growth. In part because there's too much water under the bridge, and in part because I don't have the imagination to picture being very close with them. The idea of them devoting themselves to healing seems far-fetched to me. But I do acknowledge that some degree of increased closeness could be possible, even now, after all these years. And I think this is possible with most parents and their children, given time and dedication from the parent side. Yet, when it comes to heeding my advice, most parents do the opposite at the first sign of conflict with their children. They stop studying themselves, they batten the hatches of their inner world, they violate boundaries, and often they regress into a victim mentality in which they see their children as perpetrators. At other times, they do the mirror image of this and retreat into pity for their children, thus placing themselves in the ludicrous and untenable position of benevolent saviors. And commonly parents want their children fixed. That is, they want all their family problems swept under the rug of normalcy and denial. As I mentioned in a previous chapter, before I was a therapist, I worked as a musician with children and developed a reputation for having a talent with young people. When I transitioned careers, many parents wanted to refer me their children as psychotherapy clients. The problem was that I didn't want to see children in therapy because I could see that it was the parents who more appropriately belonged there. It was the parents' responsibility to change. What I learned quickly, though, was that rarely did the parents want to come. Most actively resisted it and even found themselves insulted that I would suggest such a thing. Again and again, I heard the following, sometimes with annoyance at me, sometimes with true bewilderment, and sometimes with both. But I don't have the problem. I'm fine. My child has the problem. And a few of the parents who did come had much capacity to change. Most, instead, wanted to place all the burden of the pathology and the obligation to compromise, that is, to buckle under, on the child, neither of which, of course, were appropriate. And few, if any of them, really, at a deep level, wanted their child to heal, that is, to do any deeper inner work than simply achieve symptom relief. Deeper healing would have threatened them worse than anything. They even taught us along these lines in graduate school. Be careful, my professors and supervisors told us, of siding too strongly with the child therapy patient against his or her parent. It's a major mistake that new therapists make. They identify with the child and against the parent. This makes for problems, not the least of which is that the parents will yank their kid out of therapy the minute they get wind of what's happening behind closed doors. Instead, they taught us that apart from cases of severe physical or sexual abuse, in which we should contact the police or child protective services, our job was to be unethical and mirror society by siding with the parents, sometimes even in family therapy, with the whole family there. At best, we might be allowed to listen quietly to a child's misery and provide him weak, powerless, ineffectual witnessing. Had they been ethically, they would have taught us not only that therapy with kids is itself largely unethical, but that the rude, unethical juggernaut is unconscious parenting. But how could they tell us that, considering the majority of them were unconscious parents themselves, and the rest just sided deeply with their own parents? Yet, what if we, that is, you or I, did have parents who were optimally focused on healing their own personal wounds? How would they treat us now,
that we are adults? The answer is simple, with extreme boundaries. That is, with respect. For example, here's how a healthy parent might talk with an adult child like Paul. Son, I screwed up. I screwed up royally when you were the most vulnerable, and now I will carry that to my grave. And part of the horrible burden I must carry for gaining the awareness of how much I screwed up is that I now recognize how very little I can do for you. In the coming weeks or months or years, I will no longer be able to give you money or take care of you in any way, because that only cripples you further. The only thing I will be able to give you is the model of an adult who strives with all his being to heal his inner own childhood wounds. I'm in the process of breaking from my own parent and discovering who I really am deep inside. That is my mission. As such, I now respect you as a fellow, voluntary individual on this planet. But I will no longer pretend to be your nurturing parent, because I can no longer do that. That time is over. I now realize that you are on your own, and and I truly wish you well on your journey. An adult child, expecting parental compensation, would likely feel a range of emotions at hearing such a speech. Perhaps he would feel insulted or hurt or shocked or afraid. Perhaps he would feel devastatingly lonely. Perhaps he would feel cheated and murderously angry, mistakenly considering his parent a sadist, because many sadistic parents do give speeches along the lines of, "Toughen up, kid, time to fly the nest." Or perhaps he would just want to die. Ironically, these would be the very feelings he has kept buried for his whole life. These feelings are the logical consequences of being an abused, neglected child. And as we mature, we realize that these feelings are our allies. They guide us forward. They tell us the truth about our history and lead us directly to our authentic self. They give us the opportunity to see what we lack inside, and they give us the rudiments of the plan for how to construct lives that can provide what we are lacking. This seeming rejection by the mature parent is a vitally important dose of reality, because it finally sends us off in a healthy direction, away from them. The problem is, most parents are far too immature to treat their adult children this way, and too terrified as well. First, most could never admit what they really did to their children. And second, if they could admit it, most wouldn't dare want to provoke their children to such wild feelings. Instead, they want to keep their adult children close to them, as pets. But children are not pets. They are wild animals. They owe their parents nothing. Thus, the children of healthy parents grow up, leave home forever, and find healthy ways to function in the wilds of the world. It is only the broken pets and broken zoo animals of the human world who are afraid to wander out from their open-door cages and test the realities of real life. The world may congratulate the broken child who grows up and spends his life tending to his parents, but this only shows how sick the world is. And if parents are afraid to set their children free, then they admit through their behavior that they have failed as parents. But, as a final point here, what about reparations, that is, compensation for damages done in childhood? I've had some people suggest that this would be fair. Perhaps, for example, parents could pay for their troubled adult child's therapy. Or perhaps a father who long ago broke his child's teeth or ruined them through feeding him sugary junk food could now pay for adult dental care. Is this okay? I sit on the fence here, but if I were to climb off the fence, I would climb away from reparations and climb toward getting away from our parents and learning to sort out our own lives and our own problems through non-parental means. Again, ultimately, we as adults become responsible for ourselves, and we have within us the tools to do it. Seeking our parents' help is a slippery slope that all too easily repositions us in the role of a child. And to me, it's not worth it. I often find it difficult to discuss breaking up with parents without someone bringing up the subject of forgiveness. Personally, I don't find the two subjects inherently related, but in a society like ours that puts so much pressure on children to forgive their parents, somehow the two have become blended, like a drink concoction of fruit and poison. But why is my point of view so strong on this subject? My main personal reason is that the pressure to forgive has been repeatedly used as a weapon against me by my parents, my grandparents, by other parents, by friends who are parents, by non-parent adults wedded to their parents, by religion, by most psychology books, by many therapists, by school, and by television. The list could go on and on. The conventional point of view is hard to escape. Our society considers forgiveness to be healthy and considers not forgiving to a sort of sin, something to be ashamed of or hide or get over. So many supposedly great leaders and gurus say things like, "Forgiveness is the root of healing. You cannot heal or be happy until you begin by forgiving." And the crowd swoons and chants, and people feel blissfully happy on the surface. And those of us living in a deeper realm of consciousness feel more alone than ever. I find it important to start by defining forgiveness. The dictionary defines forgiveness as the act of excusing a mistake or offense in the context of parental abuse and breaking away from parents. I prefer to call forgiveness by its real name, dissociation. I define dissociation as the act of denying the horror you experienced, burying your authentic self, sacrificing your well-deserved rage and pain, curtailing your grieving process, closing your eyes to reality, putting your head in the sand, pretending everything's just fine, taking the side of the perpetrator, going numb, and squelching all urges to heal. In my experience, when people say they forgive their parents, they are dissociating. They give up on their true selves. But for the sake of argument, could it ever be healthy to forgive one's parents if, let's say, one's parents have really taken full responsibility for their actions, healed their own inner childhood wounds that caused them to commit their errors, and devoted their lives to stopping such offenses? My answer is no. I still find the idea of forgiveness irrelevant, because nothing excuses the horrors of the past. There is no excuse. Yes, there is understanding. Yes, there can be healing. And yes, perhaps certain degrees of respectful reconnection can potentially become possible, assuming that the child had also healed these wounds. But I've never seen parents do this level of healing. In fact, not even close. I don't know a single set of parents, or even an individual parent, who deeply even understands what he or she has done. This might sound extreme, but this is my experience. The denial of most parents is profound. Most, even the healthiest, simply have little clue what damage they've done, and, like a weak filament in a light bulb, burn out if someone explains it to them. It's just too painful, too overwhelming, too sad, and too contrary to their consciousness. Yes, sometimes parents, to their credit, do understand certain aspects of what they've done, but not the whole picture.
For this reason, I prefer to strip away the veneer, shelf the gurus and their books, and talk about dissociation instead. But, to backtrack a little, there is a good reason so many people strive to forgive their parents. When they were children, not forgiving their parents, that is, not dissociating from parental abuse, had serious emotional consequences. Children who do not dissociate actually have to feel their appropriate responses to that which was done to them. They feel their sorrow, their dashed hopes, their misery, their upwelling grief, their rage, their sickening fury, their desire to kill, their desire to cry, their desire for justice, and their burning desire to be heard. And if they feel these things, their parents will in some way banish them from the family system. This highlights the value in dissociating. It provides a lifeline for the abused child to stay connected to his abusive parents. And this is a profound template for living, for surviving. Most never break from it, even after their parents are dead. This template also provides perks outside the family system. If you are an adult who seems to have forgiven, you are allowed to join the cult to also seem to have forgiven, the conventional cult of doublespeak known as maturity. It is comforting to join a whole world of people who embrace you for being like them. It is pleasurable and makes social life smooth and certainly easier. Unless, of course, you feel that desperate urge to get real at all costs. That no matter of how supposedly forgiving other people you once called your fellows, you are a homeless outsider. Your insight into the truth makes you a reject. It is a sad irony that it is considered an unforgivable sin among those who worship false forgiveness for you to refuse to forgive your parents. You are the gust of north wind that toppled the house of cards. Meanwhile, how, I wonder, can it be possible for us to let people off the hook for crushing us when we've never even had the chance to heal from our damage? Actually, it isn't possible. Nevertheless, our species has attempted to build a society around excusing parental perpetrators. Yet so few see how insane this is. What we need to do instead is to grow and heal and process our wounds. Parental pain be damned. Or, to put it more gently, our parents' pain is not our concern. We can't excuse anyone and shouldn't try. Instead, we need to study ourselves, learn what was done to us, grieve our wounds, and perhaps at some point, if it causes us no harm and enhances our growth, even explore the histories of those who damaged us, to discover their motivations. But attempting to excuse them only sends us in the wrong direction. As an analogy, should the victim of a brutal rape forgive her rapist in order to heal? This idea is ludicrous to anyone who knows about processing trauma, yet a parallel form of this dynamic is exactly what average parents demand of average children in average families.